It just requires a different mindset. Your motivation has to be thinking about how do I get as many passengers as possible to their destinations? And now what are the limits of my academic calendar or my facilities or my faculty roster? Right. You have to think first about how many more students can get to destinations this coming academic year.
That was Josh Pierce, co-founder of Acadium, a platform for colleges to share courses across institutions so that students succeed. We had an awesome conversation about where we are and where higher ed is headed. A lot of it using the analogy of travel, which is kind of fun. Thinking about the journey students are on and how colleges and universities can get them to their destinations. And in a more literal sense, what we can learn from the airline industry in the process. Let's dive in. Collaboration across institutions is such a critical part of ensuring student success and sustainability financially now and into the future. And so much can come of these kinds of collaborations and partnerships. And I'm delighted to have Josh Pierce from Acadeum here to talk about their pioneering work on course sharing. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks for having me.
Would love to hear a little bit about how you got started in higher ed.
So once upon a time, I was a grunt Wall Street guy in New York. I had a 26-year-old existential crisis about what I was going to be when I grew up. And I landed in the education world, actually, in K-12 and charter schools. And then while I was in business school, I wrote a thesis on buying Scantron because I loved a lot of their assessment tools that they were developing. And I got these guys to take it seriously, and it didn't really go anywhere. But these guys were doing a lot of what I call today cowboy stuff in online higher ed, adult workforce, mostly supporting nonprofit universities, trying to help them shift to the larger market of adult. And so I know a lot about the plumbing of higher ed, what the regulations were, where the money comes from, how it gets spent, what accreditation is. So that got me started in this, and I've been stumbling forward ever since.
That's interesting. So Scantron is a way in. Did you enjoy taking Scantron exams?
What I did enjoy was they had some really powerful tools where you didn't have to bubble things in, but that were used at a classroom level for formative assessments that actually help iteratively drive students to outcomes that in those days I found fascinating. And it was owned by this other total non-education company that I thought couldn't recognize the value of that. And I wrote this small thing on it, and these guys took it seriously, and it got up to a certain guy's desk, and he said, "Nope, not found." And that was the end of that.
But it was an interesting journey along the way. Tell us a little bit about Acadium.
Our customers are about 530 colleges and universities of almost every type in the US. And then we've got a smattering of Canadian institutions, a couple in Mexico, one in Morocco. There's spreads out a little bit, but mostly US institutions of all types. We're also increasingly supporting high schools, employers, and international student agents. What we do is we host, I think the number is up to 1,600 course and program sharing networks across those institutions. The players participate in multiple networks is what you should hear from that. And it's a network business. Our job is to help demand find supply. So on one side, you have a college that has the student trying to get a course that they need for whatever reason, or it could be a high school. And on the other side, we've got colleges and credential players like Coursera that are constantly running the very thing that students need in a really accessible, affordable format. And so our job is to help the discovery part of that and then the actual fulfillment part, like the reservation. Can my student take this course? Here's the student information. Here's the grades back. There's a payments network to make sure that it's an economic win for everybody involved. So that's what we do today. Our job is to help support these networks and drive more and more enrollments. And give you an idea, last 12 months, it's been about 22,000 enrollments. So that's students from one place taking a course or a credential from another place. We started the business. So I can tell you more about where the business comes from, but that's really what we do today.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And have you noticed like any interesting patterns in terms of how courses get shared, or is it ones and twos from different places, or people put a whole program online, or people share with like institutions or dislike institutions to complement each other? What are the interesting patterns you're uncovering?
I thought when we started the business 9 years ago now, it would be one master network that everybody could join and then get what you wanted from. And of course, it's turned into 1,600. And so one big lesson from that is for these networks to really work, there needs to be some sense of shared affinity inside of that network. There's some common cause, some reason why we
Right.
would band together to do this. That's definitely one. And then in terms of what gets shared, I can find you an example of almost anything: undergraduate, graduate, specialized cybersecurity, AI, this, that, or the other thing, or Google IT cert. And you find examples of almost anything, but the bread and butter of what gets shared, the bread and butter of what gets used are the commodity parts in every degree. And that's where students get stuck. So that's calculus 1 and 2. It's intro to psych. Chem 101's a big one because it's really hard to find faculty for that. So it's the commodity parts, the places where people get stuck just trying to get through the system. And it's the players that have scale and being able to run those types of courses on the supply side. It follows the 80-20 rule on the supply side of our market. Roughly 20% of our schools soak up. I think the number is actually about 75% of the demand coming through just because they've got it available all the time. Right. They know their marginal economics really well. On that side, it's a very commercial conversation, but it's a massive help to helping students get to where they're trying to go.
Yeah, and what I think a lot of those courses, what you're talking about them as the kind of commodity blocking and tackling, get where you need to go, calculus, sociology, whatever it may be. A lot of those sound like gateway courses that have gotten a lot of attention and undergone a lot of redesign in recent years to really get better outcomes, right? And instead of drive people out of a degree, help them make progress. So the idea that you can scale those best practices, I think, is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea that you don't have to reinvent it yourself, it does already exist. And we didn't figure this out. The industry already had a mechanism for how to tap that in a healthy way. Our job is to try to support that at extreme scale, so the outcomes are also extreme. But one of the core ideas here is most of what students need is already available. You just have to tap into it.
Nice. Given that we're talking about students and what they need, I would love to hear your definition of student success. How do you define it?
So I don't always talk to academics this way, but I'll be straight. I define student success as a student getting to the destination. And you could frame that very broadly and I think it ought to be the destination is getting to the job I want that betters my life and my family's life. Cause I think that's the core source of most demand that ends up in front of you now. But that can also be broken down that along the way, a cybersecurity specialist is I'm going to have to learn, maybe it's computer science 101. And before that, I'm going to have to do calculus 101 to a certain standard. So you can break it all the way down to, okay, for this cycle, this passenger's got to get to this destination. So I define student success and I measure student success. And there's a way to do this publicly with any institution by you have so many passengers that signed up with you at the beginning of an academic year or a term. How many of them got there? So it could be it could be course completion. There's lots of different ways to break it down. But to me, student success is, did the passenger get to the destination?
I like that because that destination could be a course, it could be a certificate, it could be a degree, could be a career based on that degree. There's the destination and there's the journey. What are there things you measure or that you look at along the way, like satisfaction or engagement or those sorts of things?
Yeah. So we track ancillary stuff like NPS scores from the students, from the faculty, from both sides of the institution. But the core thing for us, and we have several nonprofit foundation investors in us. And so we quarterly report on this to them. It is student completion broken out by demographic and some other characteristics. One of the things we pride ourselves on is our student completion rates are as good or better than anything you'll see in the space. And that's because we pay attention to the quality of the suppliers that we will let run courses and credentials in our networks, because it doesn't work if the passenger doesn't get there.
If you have a good journey, then you get to your destination. In other words, to
Yeah.
use your analogy.
Yeah, and you get to continue on. And that's the reason why I talk about the commodity parts of every degree pathway. If you look at, these are the courses that are full when there are more students who need them, or they're running an off term from when
Right.
a huge batch of students need them, or These are the ones that constantly cause you to put students on academic probation. It's mostly your general education catalog, 100, 200 level. And that's where they get stuck and where a lot of the slippage is. And so if you can at capacity in real time, and that's one of the cool things about doing this is you might have a student who's not doing very well midterm and you know it, and you're going to withdraw them or they're just going to get a D or an F and then it's not going to satisfy the prereq. You have an ability to withdraw them and offer them a solution, not just put them on academic probation and say, you got to fix it and come back.
Because it's competency based and they could catch up if they're halfway through
No,
or something else.
For the most part, these are credit bearing courses. There's the local institution. They're structured for access much better. So they might be 4, 6, 8 weeks. So if you're 8 weeks into a term and you're taking a prereq for which you're going to have to take the follow on in the next term, if you screw up in the first one and you're out of luck, it could be for a whole 12-month cycle. And that's where students get blocked out. If you can immediately get them enrolled in the same thing, we could talk about what the same thing means because that's important here. And the same thing that might run for 8 weeks, you can catch them back up. And so we've seen institutions that are able to recover 50, 70, 80% of students that they put on academic probation. They've been able to recover and see them come into the next term now because they had a proactive solution. Hey, I'm going to put you on academic probation, but I've got a course starting next week or 2 weeks from now. If you'll take this and get to this level on it, then you'll be reinstated or you'll be able to continue on. And it's hugely successful. And I would say the feedback from students is exceptional in terms of their appreciation for the school going out of their way, even if it's not their own course, to be able to keep them on track.
So there's a lot of ways that course sharing supports student success by giving them an alternative, providing flexibility, providing capacity that a institution may not have. Like if you're off the schedule grid or you have a conflict or it's not offered this semester, whatever it might be. Are those the core ways that course sharing supports student success? What would you add to that?
Yeah, there's one of the ways I frame, I'm a sports guy, so using course sharing is almost a whole new type of offense. To really do it in an aggressive way, you almost need certain types of new players and whatnot. But to get going, course sharing is a way to target student stories. So it's not about somebody else's stuff is better than your stuff. You shift the argument to looking at the student outcomes and going, where are the student stories throughout the academic cycle that we don't do very well in, or where there is the real slippage in student retention and student outcomes. I mentioned one, students going on academic probation.
Right.
Number two, like paying attention to the courses that your students are trying to transfer in that they took somewhere else over the summer. That's another, just pay attention to it. They'll tell you where the holes are.
Right. You're like finding the workarounds and then you're getting a better solution.
You also have really hard to fill faculty areas where you may have faculty going on sabbatical or where it's really hard to recruit somebody to certain regions of the country. So I mentioned one in chemistry, but computer science and a lot of others. You may have sections of students who need to take Chem 101 this fall and your guy's out, right? That's where you can cover whole sections of demand where you may have been caught by something you didn't expect. And we have a lot of institutions that are already approved from an accreditation perspective to offer certain degrees, but they can't recruit the faculty to offer some of the core courses required to satisfy the degree. That's a great opportunity to partner with another institution that does have these courses and to ingest them as your own. And again, we can come back to talking about but to treat them as your own, and now you're able to offer a new program.
And is part of the advantage also that there is a kind of like an atomization of things that gives you more flexibility, like the way iTunes kind of changed everyone's purview from the album to the song. It's a crude analogy. Your app store now is of the individual course. So now people have much greater flexibility and choice, I would think.
Yeah, that's going up the crazy tree, which is where I like to spend most of my time. So
yeah,
that's a positive statement.
Maybe that's where the fruit is. I don't know. Just torture that analogy a little.
That's where the industry's going, quite frankly. And you can see the parallels. You mentioned it in music. The airline industry is a huge strategic analog that we use. That's why I talk about students as passengers trying to get to a destination. Yeah. The thing I'd say is I would stand on this ground. That is where the industry is going. And it is a shift in thinking from where most institutions come from, which in other industries you might call vertically integrated thinking. We've got to do everything ourselves. a shift to more just-in-time thinking. There's
Yeah.
plenty of players that can deliver the things we need to the quality that we need, so we can get more of our students to the outcomes that they desire. So you're exactly right. That's where I see the industry going. I see it. There's all kinds of plays off of this. It's a way for faculty to really high quality faculty to better support themselves across multiple institutions. Maybe you don't have to be captive to one faculty roster anymore because you're able to teach the best version of this particular course.
That's
And
interesting.
it's able to be farmed out on a wide enough footprint that you're able to do exceptionally well. The students are able to do really well, and you're not captive to the institution. Don't tell certain presidents and provosts I said that, but
Yeah. It is interesting that if you have a distribution platform in the same way that Amazon just makes it ridiculously easy for anybody to publish because then you're connected to the biggest storefront in the world. If you're a faculty member, it ushers in the free agency model where you can serve a whole bunch of students in a whole bunch of places. The sports analogy of the whole different kind of offense is interesting too. Just to pull on that thread a little bit, in the same way that the Bill Walsh passing offense ushered in the rise of the left tackle. In this whole new kind of offense, are there new sorts of roles that are surprising that working in this way, sharing courses creates, or new kinds of skills people need? What does it take to run this new offense?
yeah. So we've had some of our schools committed roles where their entire job is to pay attention to where are the holes, how are we going to fill them with capacity that we can get through networks via Acadium. And they have names that you've heard of before. It's really about the way they play. It's not like there weren't left tackles before, but and now we have these gargantuan guys because they can
Right.
stop the defensive ends. That was really what led to it. So we've seen schools who have committed positions. It really requires a school who understands the economic impact of what's happening, which the way budgets work in schools, they're so fragmented and silos. The cost may be here and the benefits actually over there. It really requires you to be able to synthesize across those things to understand that, hey, look, well, while we're putting this $80,000 a year person over here, right? It's worth $800,000 to next year's budget. And that is the scale of what we see. So there's a certain 4-year public institution that has one of these committed folk, and they did the work for us. It was great. They had their own presentation about this one person who makes $80,000 a year salary, so probably fully loaded is costs 120,000 fully loaded. That the value of the institution of doing course sharing actively was worth $1.2 million a year because of all the different student stories they could solve and all the different types of students they could recover and keep in the budget. So think of that as these are not students we have to replace just to keep up. Now you get to recruit students to grow on top of it.
Right.
So we've seen that. You can call them whatever you want. Student success coordinators is what I've seen. But yeah, it just requires a different mindset. Your motivation has to be thinking about how do I get as many passengers as possible to their destinations? And now what are the limits of my academic calendar or my facilities or my faculty roster? Right. You have to think first about how many more students can get to destinations this coming academic year.
Where are the unnecessary hurdles, or where is there a mismatch between student
Yeah.
demand and course supply? You mentioned the way it's going is the shift in scale from the degree to the course and the atomization and the working across institutions. What else is changing about sharing courses and driving completion?
So for us at Acadium, where the demand is coming from, our core use case that we started with and still is 75% of what we do is an accredited institution trying to serve an already enrolled student. And it's a lot of the stories I mentioned, classes that are
Hmm.
consistently overbooked, students on academic probation, our bread and butter, and where we developed a lot of credibility. We've done 22,000 enrollments the last 12 months. If you were to just look on the platform today, 20,000 sections running for the forward 12 months, which is probably 5 to 6,000 unique courses, we can get almost anything that you need. That led to this demand that started coming to us that we weren't expecting from players like homeschool associations, school operators, charter school operators, private school operators, virtual online school operators coming to us saying, how do you have all this stuff on the shelf? Because we're trying to offer our students better pathways, better outcomes to an associate's degree or clear pathways to 4-year degrees while they're here in our high schools. And we've got no illusions about becoming a college, right? Same thing for employers, right? We're trying to piece together pathways that work for our employees to the outcomes that we want to see in our workforce. So that's been a big change. That's probably 25% of the business now and growing faster because they're coming to us saying, okay, you've got destinations that my passengers are trying to get to. How do I get them on those flights in a way that's good for them?
What should folks do to adapt to these changes, to run the new offense and think differently?
I think from a mindset perspective, it is think first about proactively where your student's trying to get to. Don't think first about what limited capacity you have.
Your systems or your whatever your traditions, your
Yeah.
policies.
Even that, if you're in a system, think even if you just want to think inside your system, think about the networks you're already a part of. I guarantee you from having done this now for it's been 12, 13 years, I've been studying consortial networks and I learned from the best that built them over the past 40 years. You're probably already part of one that can be expanded, updated, or a lot of what we do at Acadeum, we can give you a new one that abides by the accreditation standards and the Department of Education standards. Because those are the two things you want to make sure that you're bright line inside of the accreditation standards. If you're going to direct credit for it here, even though the student took it over there are certain representations that have to be in place. And then secondly, if you're going to draw down on financial aid here, but take it over there, again, perfectly okay. Just want to make sure the right relationship is in place. That's where we've done this now hundreds of times, but you're probably already part of a network that has some of that DNA, and you can use that to expand and get access. It's probably not that far from you. That was the other realization I had. This is now a small liberal arts school partnering with a giant for-profit university. We host the Texas A&M system today, and they share a lot amongst themselves, and they've got everything from an HBCU to, small regional publics that serve their rural region really well to large market, but small institution trying to grow up to be a big institution in a large market. So that's a real capacity struggle to keep getting bigger. Like the thing I'd say is beyond just taking the right mindset and pay attention to the networks you're already part of today. It's actually a very organic thing, whether or not Acadeum can help you with it. Like there's a way to tap capacity from somewhere else and get more of your students to the destinations they're trying to get to.
That's really good advice. I like that you're probably already part of a network and it's probably closer than you think.
I'm not fear mongering here, but this has happened in every other industry. It is higher ed's time, and we're past the first chapter now. You cannot do it all yourself. You have to think this way. And again, look for the analog that works for you, that you got to change your mindset, that the institution of the future doesn't do it all themselves. If you think about airlines, American Airlines does not find all the passengers applying on American Airlines. They have to have Expedia and Priceline and those guys. And there's actually a really rich story to why airlines are self-sustaining now where nobody believed they were 30 years ago. And there's a whole story to why that grew up. Same thing in manufacturing, same thing in logistics and shipping. You can almost go down the line and it just happens to be higher ed's turn. And the ones who figure it out are the ones who win. And the ones who don't are the ones who get run over.
The airline thing is interesting because part of what makes it work is Sabre, right? Is somebody developing the interoperability and codifying things so that people can share flight data, customers. Have you done that for courses?
I'm so super excited you said that because I've been trying to stay away from that unless somebody brings it up because most people don't know what Sabre is. Most people don't know the history of why Sabre developed, but Sabre is the catalyst that allowed Expedia and Priceline and those guys to be invented in the 1990s. In the early days of the internet, players like Microsoft and others looked at what are the best ways we can monetize that we can now get traffic from anywhere. And the only thing that allowed them to be able to do that was that there was one central place you could go to that had access to everything. It had all the routes and planes and gates, but you didn't have to buy a single route, plane, or gate. And if you look at the history of Sabre, you go all the way back to the 1960s, right? What did airlines look like? They were a bespoke experience, super high touch, only available to folks who could afford it, right? And as we move into the 1970s, cost of capital goes up, starts to be really expensive to buy all the planes and build all the routes and gates. And somebody smart looked up and said, well, wait a minute, like it's really expensive for me to expand into Europe, right? But I'm not really recruiting any European passengers anyway. So what if I did a deal, code sharing deal, and I allowed the European passengers to come fly on my planes and get to US destinations and vice versa. So now I'm offering more, they're offering more. We'll figure out a B2B deal on the back end. So those in their course sharing networks. And then you see the travel agency business start in the 70s and 80s, right? And back then, like a single passenger couldn't possibly figure this out. You literally had 6 or 7 terminals on your desk to try to figure this out, these different
Right.
systems. But you could try to optimize, how do I get somebody in the right way for them, connecting at the right time with the right affordability, whatever it was. Like did that. And then you put the internet on top of it in the 1990s and it takes off. And if you look at about a third of airline travel today, if not more, is processed through the online travel agencies. That's what they still call them, right?
Yeah.
And the same thing is that the airlines have been able to move up their revenue per seat and increase the load factor on their planes at the same time. So they've been able to raise price and fill up their planes more at the same time. And that comes from network thinking, that I don't have to do it all myself. It is a huge factor for how the airline industry got itself to a healthier place, where they still are able to do what they do. They massively expanded access and affordability at the same time they were earning more per seat. Like it's really healthy what's happened there. And it's what needs to happen in education, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same way that initially there was a lot of resistance about the Common App, right? We each need to have our own application. But then when it started driving more applications by creating a standard format, people thought it was okay. And thinking about growth and the way things are headed, I know everybody's getting like whiplash from the National Student Clearinghouse. We're down 5%. Now we're up 5%. But one of the interesting things in there is I think vocational programs at 2-year institutions are up 14% versus 2% on the 4-year transfer pathway. How does online work with offline? Like, how can course sharing work for a very hands-on course?
So this is outsourcing everything. So we work with a lot of vocational schools that don't need to be teaching calculus, because somebody needs to check the box. We work with a lot of seminaries that don't need to be teaching calculus. So source a high quality version of it at a super affordable wholesale price. There are things you still need to be good at to survive.
Right.
But there's a lot of things that in order to get even better and optimize for those things that you are good at, you've got to outsource to somebody else. And that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. So part of how you help is you free up people's time to focus on what they're good at and maybe put more time and effort into the welding course that's complemented by the online piece.
Of institutions, it depends. You may not be the vocational, more professionally oriented, and you're not going to turn yourself into that overnight. A lot of what I'd say is when you think with this type of offense, at whatever level of sophistication, there's a lot more to get in terms of outcomes and resources from students you already have than having to live on the lifeline of we've got to recruit more. It's about next year's class. It's just your thinking from getting next year's class and just putting them into the same factory you always put them into. And
Yeah.
actually go look at the factory and see where all the slippage is. And I think you will find there's a lot more there that'll find more resources, drive better outcomes, and actually would become a pretty virtuous cycle to making it easier to find more students.
Yeah. I love that. I'm on the board of MCAD, the Minneapolis College of Art and Design here in town. And our strategic plan has basically one big idea, which is grow through retention. Let's keep the students we've got and improve student success. And if we do that, then everybody wins. So the idea that find those mismatches between supply and demand, find the student stories where there's capacity issues or academic performance issues, and find a better solution. I love that. I'll give you the last word. Any final bits of advice you want to share with our listeners who are trying to work across institutions, collaborate internally, partner externally, and enable student success?
The thing I'd say is I've worked with institutions now for 15 years, but I've never worked from inside institutions. That having said that, this is the funnest ride I've ever been on. And the reason for that, my encouragement to anybody here is that, yes, sure, somebody telling you have to learn a new type of offense can seem like pretty grueling. What I can tell you is this is very organic. It's actually very natural to the ethos of higher ed and how it's organized to be in network, to have a sense of shared affinity. A lot of this DNA has already been laid. This has been the funnest ride of my career so far. It still is. And I would just encourage anybody, they'll take some work to develop some new muscles on how to think this way. But I do think it's the future. And I do think it'll end up being a pretty fun ride if you start to figure it out.
That's great. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate that and all the good work you're doing with Acadeum and your hundreds of partners.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my upcoming book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.